Hey everyone, it's Christian, and today I'd like to show you a brand new remote access platform called Netbird. I've recently installed and tested this in my Homelab, and it is really amazing to connect and secure all my servers and machines in just minutes. It is based on the incredibly fast and secure VPN protocol WireGuard and establishes point-to-point tunnels between all my devices, including my cloud servers, my Homelab servers, Linux and Windows PCs, Macs, iPhones, and it has some very compelling zero trust features like access policies and posture checks. And what I personally love the most, you can host it exactly where you want. Netbird has a great cloud service platform I'm currently using, by the way, and this is free to use for up to 5 users and 100 machines, but it is also open source and can be entirely self-hosted as well. As you can hear, I'm pretty excited about it, and thanks, by the way, Netbird, for supporting this comprehensive tutorial guide for you. So let's check it out together and go through some of the important features. Okay, so first of all, let me give you a quick high-level overview of the Netbird remote access platform. As you can see, you can find all the information on their official homepage, netbird.io. There you will find the documentation, some guides, pricing information, installation tutorials, and so on. As you can see, this is a platform to connect and secure your IT infrastructure in minutes, and Netbird combines a configuration-free peer-to-peer private network with a centralized access control system in one single open source platform, which allows you to connect and secure all your IT infrastructure. If we take a look at the pricing, you can see they have different types of offerings here. So first, they offer you the cloud hosted version. So this is probably the easiest and the most straightforward approach to connect and secure your Homelab devices. You don't need to set up everything. You don't need to install a server or configure complicated firewall rules, DNet forwardings. You don't need a domain or set up a DNS or anything. They do it all entirely for you. You just need to install the Netbird client on all your machines, and you can configure it on their cloud service platform. This is, by the way, exactly the setup that I'm currently using in my Homelab, because then I don't need to set up any additional machines somewhere in the cloud. And for a Homelab situation, they offer most of the basic features that you're going to need. However, if you're a company and you're looking for some advanced features like multi-factor authentication or access, connection logging, so then you have to pick their team or business plans. In a Homelab scenario, you usually are okay with just using the free plan. I'm not sure if anyone has more than 100 machines, but hey, we had those people in our community, so... And of course, you can also scroll down. They have a self-hosted version of Netbird because it's entirely open source. However, if you're just looking for a very effortless, straightforward integration of securing your Homelab devices, you can skip this self-hosted installation guide. I will put your timestamp in the description of the video down, so you can skip this one if you're just looking for the cloud service version as well. So I think this is really great that Netbird actually gives you the option to host it exactly where you want. And because it's a company in Germany that is very transparent with their privacy policy and their self-hosted version, I think this is a big plus for many, many Homelab people. Okay, so let's get started with the tutorial to install Netbird in a self-hosted environment. So I'm going to open the documentation because they have some great quick starting guides here in this section, self-hosted Netbird. There is also an advanced guide around, but I'm just telling you this, I haven't gone through that guide actually because it requires a couple of more steps and it might be a bit more complicated. So that's why I definitely would recommend, as a first test, go to their quick start guide. So this will probably take a couple of minutes. And they already come up with some pre-installed scripts, so you don't need to configure an identity provider yourself. You don't need to configure Docker or anything like this. This is all done automatically by the installation script of the self-hosted quick start guide. As you can see, as an identity provider, this is using the Citadel identity provider. So I haven't really worked with this before using Netbird, but this is a separate open source identity provider software, and this guide will automatically deploy this for you. So you don't need to take care of this yourself. What you're definitely going to need to follow this installation guide is a Linux virtual machine, ideally somewhere in the cloud, but you could also technically host it on premise with at least 1 CPU core and 2 GB of memory. And this virtual machine should have opened the port 80 for HTTP, 443 for HTTPS, and some other high ports that Netbird is using for their connections. Also, of course, some of the UDP ports for transferring the data if it's necessary. And you need to have a public domain name pointing to the public IP address of the virtual machine. So if you're planning to run this on-premise somewhere in your home lab, you should have a static IP address and you should have a public registered domain that points to this IP address, and then you need to create some DNet forwarding rules for those ports described in the documentation. To avoid those complicated things here, I'm just going to create another virtual machine in the cloud. I've already prepared a new virtual machine on my favorite cloud provider, Civo. So this is just an Ubuntu Linux machine with 2 CPU cores, 4 GB of memory, and a public IP address that we can use. And I've added a DNS record on my Cloudflare DNS provider to point the domain name server evaluation.clcreative.de, my public domain, to the public IP address of the cloud instance. So I've met all the requirements, everything is in place. So we can now start logging into this virtual machine and run the Netbird installation scripts. Okay, so first of all, we need to meet some software requirements. We need to make sure that Docker is installed on this virtual machine and the JQ and curl packages are also installed. So those packages are used by the installation script of Netbird. So let's first update the package sources, and then let's install the JQ, Docker Compose, and curl packages on our virtual server. Once that is completed, we need to make sure that our current logged-in user has the right privileges to execute Docker commands. So I'm just going to make this part of the Docker group, and after doing this, we need to relog into the machine. Okay, so now we also need to create another project directory. I'm just calling it Netbird, and cd into it. And then we can start executing the self-hosted installation script of the homepage. So let's go back here. Let's just copy this command, paste it, and then we need to make sure that we replace the Netbird domain with our public registered domain. So in my case, I'm just going to pick a subdomain that I just call netbird.server evaluation2.clcreative.de. So make sure this is correct and you have the DNS record in place. And then we're just installing the installation script, the getting started with a Citadel shell script from the Netbird GitHub page, and pipe it to the bash script. So let's hit enter and let's hope that everything runs correctly. So it's going to take a couple of time because it's going to create some Docker Compose files. It's going to pull down the Docker images and creates some folders and volumes for storing the data. So time for a short break. Okay, as you can see, the installation script has successfully completed all of the necessary steps. It already created an administrative user account and gives us a URL that we can use to log into the system. And this actually takes us to the login console of Citadel. So we first of all need to log in here with the provided credentials from the script and connect a two-factor authentication device. So depending on what you want to use, if you want to use passwordless authentication with Face ID, Windows Hello, or Fingerprint, you can use that. Or use any authenticator app like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, Authy, or anything like this. Now we need to change our password. And that will take us to the web UI of Netbird. So now we could start adding our first device. So we could install the Netbird client on our computer, like I'm running it on macOS, so you can see it automatically suggests this installation, but you can also install it on Linux, on Windows, iOS, Android, or even in a Docker container if you like. But I'm not going to do that now. I first of all want to show you how to create additional users, because as you can see in this Netbird console, you don't really have access to create a new user. This is because we're using the identity provider Citadel, and this has a different login console as well. So if you want to log into a Citadel and create new user accounts, you have to go to the /UI/console, and this takes you to the Citadel platform. So now we can log in with our administrator account. So I don't want to go through all of the details here because Citadel, that could be probably a completely different video. So maybe I'll do that in the future or cover any other identity provider. So why not? You could do any other change in here, like change the organization, change the identity provider settings, and add other identity providers like Google, Microsoft, GitHub, and all those things. Change notification settings. And you could also rename your organization to something more meaningful. For example, this year. I don't know if that's really meaningful, but anyway. And now if we go to users, you can see now we can create and add more users. So when you click on new here, you need to give it an email address. For example, just going to create another administrative user in here. Now, it is important that Citadel usually sends a new user an email, and so that the user needs to set up a password and set up two-factor authentication and so on. You know this from the administrator account. So you can skip this because I haven't configured an SMTP provider here, and honestly, I had some problems in the past with using Microsoft 365 as my email provider in Citadel. I don't know if that's a bug in Citadel or not, so it's definitely not related to Netbird in any way, but what you can easily do to skip the email verification, you can click here on email verify and set an initial password in here and yeah, give the user a password. And then click on create. And now we can try to log in first to the Citadel console with our new user. So let's click on sign in, other user. We need to set up an authenticator again. I need to reset the password just like with the administrator account. So now that we are logged in with our new user, we can remove the UI console at the end. And now at the Netbird console, we are now logged in with our new user account. So as you can see, this user doesn't have any permissions yet. So this is just a regular user, not an administrative user. So let's log out and log in again with our admin user for a second. And if we go now to the team section users, you should see both users in this list. And now we can give this new user any roles. We could add it to a group, set it as a new owner or an admin account. So I will just use the admin role for this new user. And we can also assign this user to a new group, for example, administrators. Okay, so I'm just relogging in again. I know it's back and forth a lot, but actually, now we have the right privileges and we've configured our self-hosted Netbird instance. And by the way, if you want to back up or update your self-hosted version of Netbird, you will also find these instructions on the self-hosted guide. So just scroll down below there, you will find instructions to take a backup, to upgrade it to a newer version and remove the installation and so on. So there's really anything that you should need. And we could now start adding our new machines, our servers, our clients, start configuring access policies. You don't need to configure anything else like firewall rules, DNet, and so on. It's all done automatically by a pretty clever implementation of some stun and churn protocols in the Netbird remote access platform. And if you're interested in how that actually works, let me just go through some of the high-level architecture diagrams and documentation. They have some really great documents that describe exactly how this system works. As I said, Netbird uses open source components like the WireGuard VPN protocol to establish secure tunnels between all those peers. And it mainly relies on 4 different components. The client application or the agent that needs to be installed on every peer, and some management, signal, and relay services that are running on the Netbird platform, which can be managed or self-hosted. And in our case, we also used an identity provider, in this case Citadel, but you could also use any other identity provider to securely authenticate those peers to the Netbird service platform. So the Netbird service platform is responsible for connecting those peers and establish secure VPN tunnels between each of those peers directly. So there is no real traffic flowing through the Netbird cloud service platform. The traffic is always just distributed between all those peers. So all of those Netbird agents are connected with each other separately. So when you want to send traffic from one agent to another, there's always a separate connection to all of the agents. This is, of course, very fast, very efficient, and also very secure. You can read through all of the documentation pages. So this describes how the key exchange is handled, so how the private and the public key pairs are transferred. But I don't want to go through all of the details. So one thing that might be important, as I said, all of those peers are connected with each other, but there might be a specific case where there is no secure connection possible because there is somewhere a NAT device in between or a firewall that blocks UDP traffic entirely. So in these conditions, Netbird also has installed the turn or the relay service, so that can be used to forward the traffic from one peer to another. If there is no direct point-to-point connection possible, the traffic can go through the relay service in some conditions. However, this is very unlikely, just in case there is no connection possible. And if you're using the cloud version of Netbird, you also don't need to be worried because the key exchange is always done from one peer to another. So the Netbird cloud service usually can't inspect the traffic, it doesn't decrypt it or something like that. It just forwards it through the relay service whenever it's needed. So this is a pretty clever and secure solution to connect all the remote access devices with your on-premise or cloud infrastructure. Now let's have a closer look at how you configure or install the Netbird agent onto your machines and how you configure those access policies. I'm now logging into my Netbird production system, so there I can show you what I have configured in my setup. So as you can see, I've configured a couple of peers in my Netbird account. I'm using this on all of my production services that are installed locally on premise. And I also have installed the Netbird agent on my Mac, on my MacBook Air and my iPhone. If you want to install a new peer, you just click on Add Peer. And then you have to install the application. So this is the usual installation for any client machines and so on. If you want to install the Netbird agent on your server, let me quickly run you through the installation process as well. And let's log out of the self-hosted instance and log into one of my demo servers here, for example. So I'm just picking server demo 2 here. So this is a fresh machine. I've not installed Netbird or configured it here. And before we install the Netbird software, we also need to set up a setup key. So these setup keys are important to authenticate the agent with the Netbird platform for the first time. So we need to click on Create Setup Key and give it a name, something like Demo Servers. And you can make this key reusable, so that means you can use it to enroll multiple peers. You can also give it a limit, for example, just use it for 10 peers, and then you need to create a new setup key. And also an expiry date, so you can set the expiry date between 1 day or a year. So I'm just going to set like 3 days. And what you can also configure is ephemeral peers, so peers that are offline for over 10 minutes will be automatically removed from the Netbird platform, and they need to enroll with a new setup key or with the same key if it's still valid and can be enrolled multiple times. And you can also auto-assign this to a group. So for example, if I want to automatically enroll every server that I'm using this key for as a demo server, for example, I can create a new group here, home demo, for example. So that should be fine. And then I can click on create the setup key. So now we need to copy this one. By the way, if you want to revoke a key, you can also click on revoke, and then it can't be used anymore to enroll a new device, which is what I will definitely do after recording this video. Okay, so now let's go to peers and click on add peer. And now, because this is a Linux server, I will just click on Linux here. So if you want to install that manually, for example, here on Ubuntu, you can click on this here and then add the Netbird repository first. So I'm just going to copy this command and execute it here. Okay, that's done. And now we can, or we should actually update the package sources and install the Netbird client. So this is CLI client only, which is what I'm going to use for my servers. You could also install the UI for any Linux client machines, of course. So let's run this. And that's all. So now we can run the Netbird app and log in. So if that's a CLI, you also need to give it the setup key that I want to use to enroll new demo servers. And let's hit enter. So this will now start and connect to the Netbird instance in the cloud or to your self-hosted Netbird instance, depending on what you're using. Okay, so if we go back to the interface, you should see, if we refresh the peers, that there is a new device added to the system with this private IP address. So if we want to connect from one server to the other using the secured WireGuard VPN tunnel in Netbird, we can use these internal IP addresses, or you can also use this DNS name that is automatically attached to the device to connect to those machines. And to demonstrate how it would look like if you connect with a Netbird client that is outside of my Homelab, I'm using my MacBook Air and connected with the Wi-Fi hotspot of my iPhone using my SIM card, so that there is no internal connection between the MacBook Air and my internal network where my services are running, only through Netbird, of course. Okay, so I'm now disconnecting from the Wi-Fi network and connect to my iPhone. By the way, this is why I love Apple devices so much. I don't need to configure anything on the phone. It's just automatically connected and authenticated. Okay, so and now we can go to the Netbird homepage, install the Netbird client on our device. And now if you're using the self-hosted version of Netbird, you should go to the settings and replace the management URL and the admin URL with the public domain of your self-hosted Netbird instance. So in our case, the netbird.sreval2.clcreative.de. But because I want to demonstrate it using the cloud version of Netbird, I don't need to do that. And just click on connect. So now if we refresh the peers, you should see that there is my new MacBook Air connected with my user account. And I'm now connected to the Netbird WireGuard mesh network. I can now connect to any of those machines using the internal IP address. Let's try to ping this machine. And as you can see, this is working. So now let's try to ping the server demo2 and let's connect to it. But as you can see, this is not working, because I've configured some access control policies that allow me only to connect to the servers that are in a specific group. And because we've added this server new to the Netbird network, I've not configured the policies to allow this connection. And this is really amazing in Netbird. So just because you're connected to the network, that doesn't really mean that you automatically can do whatever you want. You have to configure very specifically what type of user, what device, what group has access to what services on the network. As you can see, I've configured access policies for SSH services, for ICMP, so the ping requests, HTTP, HTTPS, and DNS. And I've also disabled the default policy that usually allows all the traffic in the network. So this is definitely one of the first steps that I would recommend you to do, is disable the default policy and just specifically configure what is allowed, and don't just give access to everybody in the network. For example, if you want to add a new policy in here, you can click on Add Policy, and then you can define, so what is the source group? So for example, the clients have access to the destination home demo servers on all the ports, or just specific protocols, specific directions, and so on. So I'm just going to show you and demonstrate you a couple of network access policies that I've configured. For example, the ICMP policy that I've configured allows any client to connect to home production servers using the ICMP protocol. And this is also the reason why the first ping is working and the second not, because the server demo2 is not in the same group as the home production servers. So if I want to extend this policy, I could just add the home demo servers where the demo2 server is part of, and I could click on save the changes. Now if I try to ping the server again, sometimes you need to wait a few seconds. But now the ping request is going through, and it's now possible for me to access the server. The same is also true for any other access. For example, let's try to open the server production 1. And yes, as you can see, this is also working. Because I've added a policy, an access control policy for SSH connections, and this only allows user accounts that are part of the administrator group, which I am currently, to initiate a new connection to home production servers using TCP. So that also means SSH connections to the demo server should not be possible. And yeah, as you can see, I don't get a response because I need to add the demo server in this policy here as well. So let's click on Add, and now you can see it automatically works. Now, I've also added a couple of other policies here, for example, the HTTP and HTTPS policy that allows web traffic to all the production servers from any clients in the network. So that means not just administrators should have web access to my production servers. Maybe I'm also going to add the demo servers in here. And this only allows TCP traffic on port 80 and port 443, so web traffic. What I've also done in here, and that is pretty interesting, you can add posture checks in Netbird, and that allows you to specify specifically check for other settings on the client, and only if a client complies to those posture checks, it will allow the network access. For example, I've also enabled this on the SSH policy, so let me show that in here. And I've created one posture check that is called up to date, and this specifically checks if the Netbird client version is at least the version 0.26. So any older Netbird installation won't have SSH access to my servers, as well as only specific operating system versions. For example, Linux is allowed, Windows is allowed, but only when it's equal or greater than Windows 10. So Windows 7 machines that are out of support and they don't get security updates anymore, you can deny those kind of clients to get access to your important resources on the network. Same, you can also configure from macOS. So for example, you can set specific macOS versions, iOS versions, or Android versions as well. Because I don't have Android devices in any of my networks, I'm just blocking them entirely. So yeah, why should I allow traffic from devices that I don't own myself, right? You can configure those posture checks in this menu here. Posture checks, you can also add other ones, for example, country and region. That is very interesting to block access from specific countries or locations, or block traffic from certain network ranges. Also pretty useful. Okay, so I just want to show you one more thing. I just don't need the MacBook for now. So let's get it in this case. You're ready for the next mission. Okay, so now that we've covered the installation of Netbird, like the self-hosted platform, we have installed the Netbird agent using the setup key on some machines, clients, and we've configured granular access control policies with posture checks. You might have a question though. So how do you actually connect to devices or machines where you cannot install the Netbird agent? How do you do this? Well, and there is a feature that Netbird has to solve this kind of problem, which is called network routes. And this allows access to other networks or other devices without installing Netbird agent on every resource. So for example, this can be useful if you want to connect to NAS servers where you cannot simply install the Netbird agent, or on my Sophos XG firewall. That doesn't allow any third-party tools or application packages to be installed on the operating system. And this is where you can add a new network route and define a private IP address range. So you can define one single IP address. For example, if you have a device with a static IP address in here, you can use the /32 range to just add this one IP address. Or I could also, for example, connect my entire management network with the 10.50.00/16, and then you can define a routing peers. So for example, if this IP address range is in a specific office or specific branch, you can add those peers that have a local connection to this network, and then Netbird will use those routing peers to distribute the traffic inside the local network. In my case, I only have one network where all the devices aren't connected to each other, so I basically could pick any of those devices. Or what you can also do to establish a high available network route, you can use an entire peer group. So here you could use all the production servers where 7 peers have access to this local network. So it just needs one peer to be online, but it can also use any other peers as high available backup routes. And you can also configure a distribution group. So that means what type of peers to advertise this route to. For example, if I want to give the administrator group access to my management network, I could just define another network route for it. You can also disable masquerade. Usually you should actually enable this because it allows you without having to configure routes in your local network for the back path of the traffic. So you should definitely keep that on. And you can also configure the metrics, so lower metrics indicate higher policy routes. So if you have different network routes and you need to have different priorities between those, you can also set it up here as well. But that should be enough. And as you can see, I've already created those type of rules for my NAS server here, so that allows all the clients that are connected to Netbird access to this specific IP address using one of those production routing peers, and my firewall that only allows administrators to connect to my firewall using this IP address here. And I've also added the DNS server. So why the DNS server? This is also a nice feature of Netbird, because if you go to DNS, you can configure a name server so that the name resolution within your Netbird network you can also customize. So for example, I'm using my local DNS server to allow name resolution of the domain home.clcreative.de using that local IP address. And of course, I also need a network route that allows clients to access this specific IP address, otherwise it would not work. But here you can also say, like, add any DNS servers for Cloudflare DNS if you want to add name servers and assign this to specific groups or specific clients for certain domains that you are managing in Cloudflare, for example, or any other custom DNS that you want to configure on your Netbird network. Okay, so that's it about Netbird. I think this is a really great remote access control platform. They have a lot of great open source components like the WireGuard VPN protocol, which is very fast and secure, a self-hosted version that you can run on-premise or in the cloud, and they also have a free cloud service for all the Homelab fans or even small companies with great features like granular access and control, posture checks. I think this is really nice. I'm currently testing and trying this out with the Netbird cloud service version. So maybe in the future we'll also talk about other alternatives here, of course, but so far I'm very happy about this solution and I think you should definitely try it out as well. Okay guys, so that's it for today. I just want to say a huge thanks for Netbird supporting this video, and of course to all the supporters on my Patreon plan. So definitely leave a like and subscribe, that would be amazing, and I will catch you in the next video. Take care everybody, bye bye.